In the mid-19th century, it was still very difficult to transport people and items across the United States. The unforgiving and dangerous landscape of the western and midwestern U.S. formed a transportation barrier, and this barrier was the reason that most people had to move things by boat or walk across the dangerous landscape. This was a problem until the Transcontinental Railroad was built. It is widely known as the railroad that unified the United States because it went from California all the way to Iowa. Asa Whitney, a businessman, spearheaded the project with the help of two railroad companies, the Central Pacific Railroad Company and the Union Pacific Railroad Company. The building process, which started in 1864 and ended in 1869, was dangerous and difficult, and involved tearing through a lot of Native American land. The end product shaped how the U.S. is today, but lots of land was taken from Native Americans.
The Transcontinental Railroad broke one of the most difficult barriers to break in the United States, the transportation barrier. The United States is a vast range of rugged landscapes that were once very dangerous to cross. Before the railroad, someone wanting to cross the United States had to either go through a several-month travel across the land or a multi-week boat ride down the Panama where they could cross and come back up. Both routes were dangerous, and it was very common to catch diseases.
Asa Whitney, a merchant from New York, first came up with the idea for the railroad himself in 1845. Though talk of the railroad connecting both coasts had been around long before his idea. Whitney dreamed of a railway that unified the country. He advertised his idea in a booklet that he published, Project for a Railroad to the Pacific. When he first submitted his idea and a map of the track to Congress, they refused to sanction it. However, he and his booklet did draw lots of attention to the idea. In addition, Hartwell Carver made a proposal in 1849, and Edwin F. Johnson proposed the idea again in 1853. All of these proposals eventually gained the attention of politicians.
However, the idea wasn't accepted until Theodore Judah, a civil engineer from California, and Daniel Strong, a business owner in California, got the backing from four rich businessmen: Collis Huntington, Charles Crocker, Mark Hopkins, and Leland Stanford. Judah convinced them that trade would significantly increase in the areas where the track was, and that they would gain lots of money from the deal. These investors went on to form the Central Pacific Railroad Company. They would start in Sacramento and build east as far as they could. Around the same time, another private company formed that would build on the Midwest, the Union Pacific Railroad Company. They would start east in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and build west. When these rich investors got the government's attention, they finally accepted.
In 1862, after an eastern terminus was decided to be in Council Bluffs, Iowa, the Pacific Railway Act, a series of grants from the government, was signed by Abraham Lincoln.
The government granted these two companies, Central Pacific and Union Pacific, a total of about 1,800 miles of land. Each company was paid about $16,000 to $48,000 per mile of track, depending on the location. Construction started in 1866, with Union Pacific starting in the east and Central Pacific in the west. Both companies tried to race towards the center to try and lay as much track as they could.
Some of the land granted to the companies, which was 200 feet on each side of the track, was Native American land. This angered the natives, and during construction it was common for the natives to attack the workers. These attacks would range anywhere from tearing up track and derailing supply trains to actually getting violent with the workers and killing them. This was the fate of Captain John W. Gunnison's team, one of several groups sent out by the government to survey possible routes. The construction of the railroad also resulted in millions of buffalo being slaughtered. Some laborers would kill them for food, but the majority of deaths would come from the trains, which would bring in lots of sport hunters once passenger services opened for business. This made the natives angry, since buffalo was a major food source for them.
Theodore Judah originally suggested that the companies use Irish immigrants as laborers. However, only about 20% of the workers ended up being Irish. As Irish work was spread thin, the companies started using immigrants from China. There was an abundance of Chinese immigrants coming to the U.S., and they were willing to work for very little money. Their payments were about $1 per day of work, which is equivalent to about $15 in 2020. This is very cheap labor, considering the laborers had to go through some awful environments. They often had to use dynamite to blast through solid rock and make tunnels. Sometimes they would even sleep in the tunnels that they made. Many workers died during construction, though the companies kept no official numbers on record.
Companies met on May 10, 1869 in Promontory Point, Utah. They shook hands, and the governor of California drove a ceremonial golden spike into the ground with a silver-plated hammer. A telegraph wire was connected to this spike, and the instant that the hammer made contact, an electric signal was sent east and west of the spike. Cannons were instantly fired, and music was played all across the United States, signaling the unification of our country.
5 days after the track was completed, passenger trains opened for business. People and products could now travel from one coast to another within a week. This was very necessary for an industrial standpoint, since there was a recent increase in resource mining in the U.S. Although the track didn't attract very much trade from continents like Europe and Asia, trade increased exponentially along the track. Within 10 years, $50 million worth of goods were shipped from coast to coast. Also, within just a few decades, there were plenty of lines branching out and running parallel. These tracks made travel even more easy for people living at latitudes that were far away from the original track. However, not all of this is a good thing, considering that much more Native American land was taken in the process.
The railroad helped greatly with the colonization and distribution of population in America, and its effect on our country is very much felt to this day. It made getting from east to west significantly easier and cheaper. The railroad also helped to build cities in the West and Midwest because people could travel and ship supplies there with ease.
Some effects remained for a long time, too. For example, although much of it has been cleared, some tension still remains between Native Americans and the people who invaded their land. Also, after the flood of migrants coming in from China, the Chinese Exclusion Act took effect in 1882. This strictly limited the amount of Chinese immigrants allowed into the U.S. and caused discrimination towards the Chinese. Though the act was eradicated in 1943, the racism that resulted from it lasted long afterwards.
The transportation barrier that the Transcontinental Railroad broke has, in a way, created the U.S. as we know it. It significantly helped with the colonization of North America, and some of the cities that resulted from the railroad developed into modern ones still lived in today. The negative effects are still present in some ways, considering that the colonization of the U.S. has taken much more Native American land since the completion of the railroad. But nevertheless, the railroad shaped the United States as we know it today.